please remember that it is only at first, only in the first months or year, that it would seem as if living the infinite way is a bit burdensome and difficult, and be willing, for the sake of the fruitage, to experience some of the labor that goes with this work in the beginning. In living the infinite way, then, you are doing two things all day long. You are doing protective work, and you are doing treatment or healing work. You're engaged in those two activities all day long, whether or not anybody asks you for help. And you are always using these three principles in the major part of your work. First of all, from the moment of your waking in the morning, you are doing protective work. Now, don't think of protective work in the sense of protecting yourself from evil or anybody else. Remember that protective work is the realization that there is no power to protect oneself from. That is protective work. Protective work is living in the realization that since there is only one power, there are no other powers to do anything or be anything, and any suggestion of such as this mesmeric influence or mortal mind or arm of flesh or nothingness. Now, without this, you are not consciously thinking of accidents or discords or diseases or sins or temptations, but you are permitting yourself to accept unconsciously or subconsciously the world's mesmerism, the world's hypnotic suggestions. In other words, this evil touches our lives, any form of error touches our lives in very much the same way as this subliminal perception operates. In other words, there is something entering our consciousness which we do not see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. It enters in the form of suggestions or mental impositions. You don't have to see a headline to know that there's trouble in the world. You inwardly feel it. But even if you can't sense that it means trouble, you can tell it that you've awakened with a headache, or you've awakened with a dullness, or you've awakened with a sense of fear. None of this originates in you. None of this is part of you. You may not even have read that there's a flu epidemic going around, and the first thing you know, you have flu. You weren't exposed to it. You didn't consciously entertain it. But suggestion enters our thought, our consciousness, and when there is not a protection from it inside, that is the understanding that this hypnotic influence, mesmeric influence, whatever you want to call it, a mental malpractice it really is, unless there is a realization that it isn't power, that it is not an emanation of God, it can take root in you and appear in any form or every form, and it does appear, and that is why we have these human experiences. Now, in this early part of our conscious activity, it is necessary that often throughout the day, when we receive suggestions of whether it's accidents or sickness or sin or wars or depression or lack or unemployment, As soon as these things touch our consciousness, we should be alert enough to know that this is the tempter. This is a temptation. This is a suggestion from that universal mind of a power and a presence apart from God, and rejected in the realization that this is nothing but the fleshly mind, or the arm of flesh, or nothing. This is not power. This is not God ordained. This has no law of God behind it. And then you're through with it. It takes a minute, but you have consciously set up within yourself the power of truth. Truth being infinite, nothing else can enter. Now, in the same way, the time you aren't doing that, you're engaged really in treatment or healing work, because on every side of you, you are witnessing sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, unemployment, disfigurement, alcoholism, drug addiction, poverty. All of these things confront you on the streets, in the press, on the radio, and you can't afford to be a blotting paper. You can't afford to just let those things go in and pass through you and probably take root. You are consciously alert to realize, yes, these are pictures of sense. Yes, these are mental images. Yes, these are suggestions. But in our understanding of one God, one power, one law, this is nothing. Then you will find you are abiding in the secret place of the Most High, and none of these things will come nigh thy dwelling place. And if not literally none of these things, few. And when they do come, you've got a principle with which to work to free yourself. Oh, it is probably true, as far as I know it's absolutely true, that there are no humans on earth who completely avoid discords and inharmonies, not even if they lock themselves away in monasteries or convents, because that same old human mind follows us wherever we go, and it accepts these subliminal suggestions even when we're not aware of them. So there's no place you can go and hide from the world's troubles, because your mind is a receiving station. And you don't have to see, hear, taste, touch, or smell in order to become aware. You can get it right from the atmosphere. Now, once you have trained yourself to realize that all of these appearances, and that's what Jesus called them, appearances, judge not after appearances, judge righteous judgment. Everything that came in that nature to his awareness was an appearance. And he didn't judge by that. He let it pass by in the realization that it was only that. Thou couldst have no power over me. What did hinder you? In other words, it isn't power, then it can go by. Now, as you engage in this practice, you'll find two things. First of all, you will save yourself from so much of this world's woes, so much of this world's negative experiences. But what is even more important than this is that once you have proven it in your own experience, you will see how quickly your conscious awareness of these principles begins to set others free. They don't have to know that you're knowing the truth for them or about them. And yet, you'll be surprised how many will receive healing without knowing the direction from which it comes. And of course, since we're not out for personal glory, and since we didn't do it as a personal thing, it was a principle in operation, we need not be concerned about getting credit for it. To us, the joy and the satisfaction is that we have discovered a principle of life that we can live by and which will benefit those who are receptive and responsive to it. Getting credit for it is a lot of nonsense, because it makes no difference how many medals are pinned on you while you're here. You can't take them with you. It makes no difference how many honors or titles you receive in this life. You don't take them with you. So really, we don't require any. You know what we take with us as we leave this plane? We take with us every single bit of spiritual enlightenment, every bit of knowledge of good. This is stored up where neither moth nor rust can corrupt, and we take it with us. It becomes the foundation of our next experience. Try to remember this. We are storing up for the future treasures. But the treasures that we store up and take with us are spiritual treasures. The good that we bring into our experience in life is what we take with us. These temporalities we can't take with us. Our money and stocks and bonds we check at the probate court as we go out. And the medals, they go to Smithsonian Institute. And the titles and the honors on our certificates, our family take down off the wall and send down to the basement for a few years and then burn them. These are of no avail to us, not one bit. And even the good that is sometimes spoken of us is relatively unimportant. There are probably just as many saying the opposite. But every principle of life that you embody in your consciousness becomes your state of consciousness throughout all time. Just as every skill that you attain here is yours throughout your experience here. You don't lose your skills, you don't lose your abilities, you don't lose your wisdoms. And so it is that you carry with you. Now, this isn't in the nature of trying to build up rewards for the next life, but rather the understanding that the principles of spirit, the spiritual principles which we learn, are our own protection, our own health, safety and security and peace, and they are the principles which we know will be the freedom for every individual on the face of the globe as the world awakens to these principles. Now, you may think that you are living your own life and that nobody else is affected by it. You may think that you are unimportant, or that you are unknown, or that you have no influence. And I want to tell you that this is the most disastrous state of thought that you can possibly indulge. There wasn't anybody more unimportant than Thomas Edison when he was selling newspapers on a train. There wasn't anyone with less influence, money, or standing in the world than Mrs. Eddy. There wasn't anybody in the world farther removed from any possibility of doing anything for anybody in the world than I was, out about my business of buying and selling merchandise. And yet, in the experience of thousands and tens of thousands, it is discovered that if I live my life unto myself, and if I concern myself only with attaining some of this wisdom for myself, I can't keep it bottled up within myself. It has to spread. Somebody witnesses the fruitage of it and wants some of it. And that's how it begins. There isn't any one of us who knows how very unimportant Jesus Christ was as a Hebrew rabbi. And certainly every one of us knows how true his words have become, that my words shall not pass away. For they still live in our consciousness, awaiting our demonstration this very day. There is no one, especially in a free world, unimportant. Nor is there anyone living solely and exclusively unto themselves, even if they seem to be so. Because, as Emerson told us, what you are shrieks so loudly I cannot hear what you say. In other words, what is taking place in your consciousness is an influence. And therefore, if you are studying these principles for no other reason than learning them, than finding out what the secret of life is, eventually these principles will do something to your life, and then through you to someone else. And you have no way of knowing how widespread that will be in time. No, there are unimportant people in this world, and they're all the people who believe they're unimportant. And that's what keeps them so. We are important to each other. We are important to the entire world. We cannot live unto ourselves without benefiting others if our attention is on seeking out, searching out the secrets of life. No one can keep them hidden. I don't know if you know that Albert Einstein expected to go to his grave keeping secret all that he knew about the atom. He had pledged that to himself, that he would never reveal his knowledge to anyone. Not because he didn't understand the great good that would come to the world through the right use of this knowledge of the atom, but because he knew that in the wrong hands, the evil that it could do. And he didn't feel that even the good that it could do was worthwhile if any of that evil got out in circulation. And he only gave up this information on the personal word of the one to whom he gave it, that it never would be used for a destructive purpose. And under those conditions, he gave up that secret. Well, of course, the promise wasn't kept, but the point is this, that eventually the day will come when that knowledge that he gave to the world will benefit it. When we're long past the thought of its destructive power, we'll find the greatness of its constructive power, and then the whole world will be rebuilt, so that even if you want, you can't keep bottled up in you these secrets, these principles, these laws. Now, you must understand that these spiritual laws and principles do not only manifest themselves in what we call this spiritual healing or spiritual living. Oh no, it isn't meant that everyone on the earth should just be a religious mystic or a spiritual healer. These spiritual principles will manifest themselves in new forms of music, new forms of art, new forms of literature, new scientific discoveries. Never forget that. it must be 5 years ago that I said to classes that probably within 25 years there won't be any need of spiritual healers because there won't be any more disease on earth. Because medical science has wiped out much of the diseases of the earth, and I have every firm conviction within me that within 25 years it will have solved all the rest of them, more especially the major ones. And that, of course, would put us out of business. Of course, some of the medical doctors are afraid we're going to put them out of business. We never are. And if we expect to be healers all of the time, you can take my word for it, they're going to put us out of business. But that is not our function. That is only one of the temporary landmarks on the way. It is only one of the temporary signs of the spiritual principle. I know that it will not be too long before medical science will have wiped out major diseases. But our function will be greater than ever, because without having our health to concern ourselves about, we can give our entire attention to living with these spiritual principles and let them come forth in new forms of peace on earth, new forms of peace treaties, new forms of life. You probably know that for several years past, I have been one of those active in seeking to make this University of Hawaii have its place as an international institution, and have worked with that magazine. Now, the Spirit operates on that plane of consciousness to unite East and West, and to unite it through the cultures, the languages, the literature, and the art of the world. Don't think for a moment that this grand work that we are doing is limited by any manner of means to merely being a way of accomplishing some healings of the body or of the mind. That is only a minor function. Our major activity is that we may live by spiritual principles, and through the development of our spiritual awareness or soul faculties, bring forth greater beauties, harmonies into this world than it's ever known, and through every direction. Now, I should hate to believe that we were dedicating our lives merely to making a few of us a little more comfortable in our bodies. No, every healing is to be a witness to you that here is a principle of life which, when understood and practiced, will bring forth harmony. Harmony of body, yes. Harmony of mind, yes. Harmony of purse, yes. But now go on from there. New forms, infinite forms of harmony and beauty and goodwill and peace. You see, travel is one of the most wonderful activities for many different reasons. But in my lifetime of travel, its main function has been meeting people. My interest is people. I've seen all the scenery, sometimes once, sometimes twice, but that's enough for me. I've seen the art galleries too. But I like people. And I don't go back around the world over and over and over again to see more scenery or even to see more art galleries. But it's to meet people. Because in our relationship with each other, lies the secret of life. Life is for living, and but living cannot be done except it is done with each other. No one can live a life unto themselves and be fulfilled. No one. And no nation, no race, no color, no creed can live unto itself and become anything but ingrown. Now the time is ripe. Now the time is ripe when travel takes place faster, cheaper than any time in the history of the world. And we're all travel conscious, not only the people of this country, of all countries. Even those who believe at the moment they can't afford it are trying to afford it. And although many of them do not realize that the purpose of the travel is more than seeing scenery, nevertheless, you'll find that the more traveling takes place, the more meeting of minds there is, the greater understanding of each other there is. But that's on the human level. Think now, when each one of us is aware of the fact that we are the temple of the living God and are no longer ascribing evil to each other, no longer believing that evil is a component part of this race or that race, or this nation or that nation. Think, as we embody these spiritual principles, and then discover that this spiritual illumination is a bond, an invisible bond between all of us. Then you'll commence to understand the greater functions of a message like the infinite way. And you'll understand why you cannot fulfill that function until, first of all, you have a God. And in having a God, you lose all fear. Fear of person, fear of thing, fear of condition. Because you cannot have a God and fear. Only an atheist can fear. And anyone who fears is an atheist, regardless of how many churches they belong to, and no matter how much they protest about their belief in God and faith in God, don't believe them. They haven't even come nigh to any faith or belief or understanding of God. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And wherever there's an understanding of the nature of God, one cannot fear. They cannot fear life and they cannot fear death. If I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And the very moment that we have a God, fear goes out the window. Because in having God, we have the only presence, the only power, the allness, and then that we share with each other. So we practice this one power, and so we practice our two principles of impersonalizing and nothingizing. And as we do, we are lifted into this higher spiritual atmosphere in which we have contact with each other on a spiritual plane, in which we have contact with the wisdom of the world. You know that every person on earth would have supreme wisdom if there weren't this mesmeric activity keeping it away from them. In other words, this belief in two powers. Because without that, there is only the one infinite consciousness manifesting itself as individual consciousness. Remember this. God consciousness is your individual consciousness, and therefore all that God is, I am. All that God has is mine. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. That doesn't refer to money. It refers to life, wisdom, love, peace, joy, dominion, All that I have is thine. What prevents us then from being infinitely wise and infinitely loving? Nothing more or less than this thing that was built around us when we were conceived, this humanly mesmeric influence. And it begins to dissolve in the moment that you recognize this and realize, but it isn't a power. It has acted a power in my experience because I have accepted the world belief in two powers. And now I know there is but one power. Then you find that as this nothingness becomes nothing, then you find that your consciousness is the inlet and the outlet for all the wisdom of God, all the art, the literature, the music, the science, anything and everything which is your birthright. Actually, because of our differing natures, it isn't very likely that we will develop infinitely in more than one direction, but there have been those who have developed in 4, 5, and 6 directions. We call them cosmic minds, only because there was no hypnotism, there was no mesmeric influence keeping out this God wisdom, God knowledge, God power. And so they were a transparency through which art, science, literature, and many other things could come. There have been many such people in the history of the world. They were just people in whom this human hypnotism didn't operate. Now, watch the transformation that takes place in your own experience. Watch the limitations that are broken down the moment you realize that there's nothing keeping you from being a transparency for God, for the infinite nature of God, the infinite wisdom, life, love, truth. Nothing operating but this universal belief, and it is in power. And it has operated heretofore only because, not knowingly, unknowingly and unconsciously, I accepted the world's estimate 2 powers. Because of that, it has functioned. As you nullify it, it begins to lose its power in your life, and you become a greater transparency for divine wisdom, divine love, divine life, divine powers. I told you last night that when this work and this message was given to me, it was told me that my consciousness will be your consciousness. I will do these things as you, through your consciousness, which will really be my consciousness. And that infinite divine consciousness has operated in me and through me, for me and before me, to do these works of the infinite way. And then on April 8th, the same voice said, my consciousness will be the infinite way consciousness throughout this globe. My consciousness will function as the consciousness of the infinite way, of its students, of its work. That was given to me on April 8th, and I know that it's functioning now because I know by the letters I receive how many are already receiving light and illumination and experiences that before that date never had had such spiritual experiences. So I know that this consciousness is operating as their experience, and it will go on and do more so. Actually, the truth is, this consciousness is the consciousness of every man and woman in the world. But it cannot function through this mesmeric sense. It cannot function through selfishness. It cannot function through the mind of those who are on the make, who are seeking only for me and for mind to get and to achieve. It can't function that way because the nature of that mind is an expressing mind, a giving, a bestowing. It is a benediction. The mind of God is a benediction to this world. It is a full-flowing mind of blessings. And we have hindered its operation, not consciously. Oh, no, no. Let's not go back to blaming anybody. Not consciously, but because in our ignorance we have accepted self-preservation as the first law of nature. We have accepted two powers. We have accepted my mind, and then started to count how little or how much education we had and judge by that. And so we've limited ourselves instead of realizing that the God consciousness has no limitations and it embodies infinite wisdom and it imparts it to all of those who are a transparency for it. To be a transparency for infinite intelligence and divine love means to recognize that this thing called devil, mortal mind, or carnal mind, this mesmeric influence of two powers is not power, is not functioning in my experience, and has no law of God to maintain it or sustain it. And then gradually you find how freeing it is and how free you become inside. You must remember that I have said to students many times who have spoken to me, many who have written to me, and says they're discouraged because they don't feel spiritual. And remember what my answer always is, and you never will. And if you meet anybody who says they feel spiritual, don't believe them, they're lying to you. There is no such thing as feeling spiritual, any more than there is such thing as feeling moral. Have any of you ever felt moral? You can be moral, but you can't feel that you're moral. You can be honest, but you can't feel that you're honest. Well, you'd go around just praising yourself all day long if you could feel that you were honest or feel that you were moral. You don't. It is what you are, but that's your natural being. And the moment this mesmeric sense is broken to the extent that you can grasp even a little bit of the fact that there is only one power, you are spiritual. The very moment you are not depending on bread alone for your life, you're spiritual. In the degree that you know that man does not live by bread alone, you're spiritual. In the degree that you know that money isn't supply, money is only one of the forms that supply takes for our temporary use. The minute you know that, you're spiritual. The minute you know that God is infinite, the only power, you are spiritual, but you can't feel it. You can be it, you can experience it, but not feel it. I don't think musicians feel musical. There is no such thing. So don't try to make an emotional experience of this and try to feel spiritual. Don't try to feel mystical. Don't try to feel anything. Be it. Be it. Don't feel it. The realization in this room of these principles begins instantly to operate as a freeing influence in your consciousness. And it doesn't heal you of anything. It doesn't enrich you. It doesn't improve your morals. It breaks the mesmeric sense and leaves you as the spiritual being, the harmonious being, which you naturally are. I don't know how to describe that, except that there are times when we have a limiting sense of ourselves, and then there are other times when, for one reason or another, that limiting sense disappears and we are our natural selves. Or there may be times when we have a fearful sense, and for hours we may be walking around in fear or dread, and then all of a sudden it dissipates and it's gone and we are our natural selves. Well, that's what I mean by this. Every sense of limitation, every sense of discord, every erroneous trait of character is nothing more than an erroneous sense that's gripping us, and the very moment that one with God begins to realize the one power and the non-power of this mesmeric sense, a sense of freedom takes its place. And you're the same person you were, only now you're free. Whereas before I was blind, now I see. Whereas before I was in a sense of limitation, now I feel free. Whereas before I may have even felt inadequate, now I feel adequate to whatever situation is brought into my experience. The whole thing really is dehypnotization. Now, many, many years ago, when I was spending all of my time in the practice, doing nothing else but the practice, and patients came to me, and I recognized, of course, just watching them, how they were functioning from a sense of limitation inside, how they were functioning from a sense of fear, and many other things that aren't normal and natural to man as he should be. And I would hear friends of mine in the practice say, oh, if so-and-so would only do this, or if so-and-so would only be this way, or if so-and-so would only overcome this. And through those things I saw that these inequities, these injustices, these bindings, limitations, were nothing more than this mesmeric sense. And then the question used to come to me, how do you break this hypnotism? How do you break this hypnotism that's binding this person to greed, and this person to miserliness, and this person to lust, and this person to fear? How do you break this mesmeric sense? And don't ever think that it wasn't years of meditation and years of almost breaking the heart to try to get at the secret before it was revealed to me that the way to break the hypnotism was to know that hypnotism isn't a power, and that that is the only way. And that has been the practice and the function of my work from that day to this. Not trying to break hypnotism, not trying to free anyone from being hypnotized, but by knowing that hypnotism itself is an activity of the carnal mind, and therefore has no power and has no law. I can tell you that that is how we worked when the subliminal perception was offered to the world and was succeeding. And that from the day that we went to work, it hasn't succeeded since. They had to scrap all of the machinery that they had built. They had to stop the pictures that they were making. They had to stop all their experiments, because from that day on, there wasn't 1% of success in any one of their experiments. And up to that time, they'd been having 57% average. But it dropped from 57 to nothing, and it's been nothing ever since. Why? Because the activity of subliminal perception is an hypnotic influence that comes out of the mind of man, or carnal mind. And therefore it isn't a power, and therefore it has no law to sustain it, and it's inoperative, and one with God is a majority. Watch it with the weather. Watch it with tidal waves. Watch it with storms, and see how quickly you dissipate them. The very moment you know that they are not conditions of matter, they're activities of the mesmeric mind. Watch them, how they stop instantaneously. They can't last long in the face of the realization The question was asked of Dr. Suzuki the other night, if you see a flag, or rather he asked it probably in his talk, if you see a flag waving, is it the flag that's waving or the wind? And he said, neither, it's the mind. And they laughed at him and ridiculed him. They don't know how true that is. Nothing happens outside the activity of the mind. If it did, there'd be nobody aware of it. Nothing happens outside the activity of the mind. Not a thing. Therefore, if it's the mind of God, you cannot change it, you cannot alter it, you cannot improve it, and don't try. Don't try to fool with 2 times 2 is 4. Don't try to fool with the movement of the stars or the sun or the moon or the tides. Don't do it. These are the activities of the divine mind, the divine consciousness, the infinite, immortal, eternal, that which was before there was a human being to know it. But anything that exists as an activity of the carnal mind, you can nullify. And in proportion to the degree of your awareness of these principles, you may start with only small things, minor things, but you'll work up to the greater ones because it's all proportionate, just as probably Jesus could heal better than the disciples and the disciples better than the apostles. So it is all a matter of degree. The degree of our awareness has nothing to do with God. So far as God is concerned, God is infinite. It has nothing to do with error. So far as error is concerned, it's nothingness. It's the arm of flesh. Now, what does matter is the degree of our awareness of these principles. And once you know that anything that is the emanation of the carnal mind, of the devil, of Satan, of mortal mind, any time, any moment that you know that any such emanation is without law, without God being, God presence, or God power, you have started to annul it. Now, in your present state of consciousness, if it doesn't yield the first time you know it, keep at it 100 times. Because sometimes it takes 100 times of knowing to break it. Probably if you had found the spiritual master at his height, he would have broken it the first time. But if you and I aren't at that level, let's go back at it the second time, and third time, and fourth time. Those of you who have ever asked me for help for any problem know that I have never been impatient if it didn't yield at once. I'm perfectly willing to go back the next time, and the next time, and the next time until it does yield, because I know that it's only the degree of our awareness, the depth of our awareness, that really meets the situation. And if we haven't got it today, let's go back at it tomorrow and keep at it until we accomplish it. Above all things, remember this. Every word I have said to you tonight is absolute truth. And also remember, it will not do a thing for you except in proportion as you can embody it in your consciousness and consciously utilize these principles in what you would call prayer or treatment or contemplative meditation, but making these principles active in your consciousness. The time will come when you will find that there will be very little human effort involved, very little mental effort. But that will only come as these principles are embodied within us and become real to us. Now you know what's happened, don't you? It just about cut out the rest of this class. Thank you.